Day 1. The Karpov House stood 7 miles away from a small provincial town called Bezrydny. If you took the road north past the Shosek-Palyum Federal Highway, where grain crops were planted every year, you would find yourself in the Malabzhi rayon. Most of the private houses that used to dot the area over half a century ago were now gone. They were once inhabited by peasants who had their own farms. In the early 90s, they moved to the cities en masse, completely losing the ability to support their families and the hectares of land around their homes. Now these lands looked almost desert-like. It's strange that anyone would buy them. Vitaliy stared out the side window while realtor Konstantin Dyuzhev drove his car with difficulty towards the Karpov house. Dyuzhev looked at the young man with distrust and asked where such confidence came from. Vitaliy shrugged his shoulders. It's far, and they haven't planted anything in those fields for about 10 years. It's none of our business. The main thing is to prepare the house for sale. Anything else is not your main concern. The 22-year-old man looked at the driver, his lips slightly pursed. Dyuzhev was a man from the big city and didn't always understand the local population. All he needed was to sell the house, so there was no point in explaining the beliefs of these parts. The young man looked out the side window again, deciding that he would now be more restrained in his remarks. Half an hour later, they turned off the paved road onto a dirt road with well-packed soil and completely bare fields on both sides. In such a lifeless place, the house on the side seemed lost in a desert of black earth that takes on special rusty hues in autumn. It rose 2 stories high, looming over the annex and reaching for the sky with a pointed attic roof. A spacious barn and garage stood nearby. The car stopped by the porch, and the men got out. The cold wind made them immediately fasten their jackets and hurry to the door. I haven't been here for about 10 years, Vitaliy said when they were in the front hall. So you won't have to waste time studying the layout of the rooms. Dyuzhev stopped in the middle of the room, cluttered with old dusty things, and said, not even wanting to look around. You have 3 days to put everything here into boxes, especially rake out the junk in the attic and basement. Don't forget about the barn. Just pile the tools in a heap. The movers will come on Wednesday and take everything away. Yes, if you find a punctured pipe or some other serious breakdown, let me know. Yeah, I got it. Okay, then don't waste time. Dyuzhev patted the young man on the shoulder and left the house, slamming the door behind him. Vitaliy looked toward the huge pile of pressed cardboard boxes and got to work. First, he gathered all the things in the front hall, mostly small items. Then he switched to the kitchen, where, as it turned out, there was more than enough of everything. The only thing the young man regretted was that he didn't have a player, because now he would have to spend 3 days in complete silence. After 5 hours, there were already about 24 boxes in the front hall, tightly packed with things and wrapped with tape. 7 of them had living room written on them in black marker, others had kitchen. Since Vitaliy knew well that all the things would go straight to the heirs of the property, and who knows, maybe the spoiled city dwellers would look into one of them to see the things that once surrounded their ancestors. He sat down on the couch and took out a plastic food container from the bag he had brought with him. As it turned out, the gas in the kitchen worked quite properly, which meant that for all 3 days the young man would be provided with hot food. Spreading out on the coffee table, Vitaliy began to eat, flipping through an old magazine he had found in the bookcase. The day was drawing to a close, and the sun was slowly stretching toward the horizon. Today he planned to go up to the attic to assess how much work was there. When dinner was over, Vitaliy went upstairs and inspected the 2 bedrooms. One of them had a quite acceptable bed for sleeping. In the other stood a large desk with completely empty drawers. Vitaliy was already heading toward the attic stairs when he heard the sound of an approaching car. The young man immediately went back downstairs, not understanding why the realtor had returned. He went outside, but instead of an expensive foreign car, he saw a police patrol car and the local precinct officer, Mykola Volodymyrovich, who, having got out of the car, was looking over the house. "So that's how it is. They sold it," the man said, seeing the young man on the porch. "Good afternoon, Mykola Volodymyrovich, and how did you end up so far away?" Vitaliy walked down the stairs and, coming up to the man, shook his hand. "I didn't come to look at the house," the precinct officer began, although he himself did not take his eyes off the building. "An extraordinary incident happened in our area. The 5-year-old daughter of the Sirotins, who live on the outskirts, has gone missing. I know them. I think the girl's name is Irina." "Yes, that's right. We've been searching for the second day. Tomorrow, big shots from the region will descend, promising a helicopter if we don't find her by morning. The fuss will begin, and the parents are beside themselves. The father calls every 20 minutes. The man shrugged his shoulders as if to say we're doing what we can. "Can I help with anything?" Vitaliy did not take his eyes off Mykola Volodymyrovich, realizing that such cases rarely occur in the career of a policeman who monitors order in such a small province, but not in Bezrudny. Here, for some reason, children disappear so often that you might as well put a patrol by every tree. You already have a lot of work to do, as I see. Houses are rarely sold here, so I think the realtor will sooner tear his butt than let you search for the child." "That's for sure." Vitaliy smiled, remembering how Konstantin Dyuzhev literally changed his face as soon as it came to preparing the house for sale. "But if you find out anything, let me know." Mykola ended the conversation and headed back to the car. Vitaliy said he would definitely call, and when the precinct officer left, the young man followed him with his eyes for a few more minutes, feeling everything inside him squeeze at the mere thought that somewhere in these parts a 5-year-old child was wandering, unable to find her way home. Vitaliy returned to the house and, going up to the attic, found not so many things there that the former owners had brought up, not wanting to throw them away. He looked into a wooden chest that stood by the wall. It contained only old dusty things that would have to be put into plastic bags. Then the young man switched his attention to an old closet stuffed with all kinds of junk that for some reason had been moved here. Rummaging through the things, Vitaliy came across an old military binoculars, so huge and heavy that he immediately wanted to look through it from the attic window. He went to the window and began to examine the fields stretching to the forest plantations, discovering that through these optics he could easily see the entire forest glade. The black fields lay like a canvas on which nothing grew, and only somewhere in the center, leaning slightly to one side, stood a scarecrow. Vitaliy adjusted the focus and looked at it more closely. A hat with unnaturally wide brims and a face made of a sack stuffed with straw. It looked creepy. Vitaliy smiled at the thought that it was high time the scarecrow retired, because there was nothing to guard in the empty fields. Then he put the binoculars back in place, decided to tackle the attic tomorrow, and now headed to the first floor, where there was still plenty of work until late in the evening. Day 2. From the very morning, the clouds that had loomed over the entire valley like a leaden ceiling the day before dispersed, giving way to sunlight. But judging by the cold north wind, such weather would last only until evening. Vitaliy decided to take advantage of this opportunity. He went outside at 8 in the morning and, armed with a rake and a shovel, began to clear the yard of weeds and accumulated debris. The sun's rays warmed the air, and by noon it had become really hot. Having finished cleaning the yard, he went to the garage, where there was very little work to be done. Perhaps the former owners, when leaving, took everything related to tools and cars, but it would take at least 3 hours to clean up the remnants. Vitaliy carried pieces of rusty metal into the yard, stacking them near the entrance gate, and when the clock showed 1 o'clock in the afternoon, he decided to take a break and have lunch on the veranda. Having warmed up the food and put on a sweater so as not to catch a cold sitting in the wind in the shade of the house, he sat down on a chair, put a plate on his knees, and started to eat, looking at the blackened fields. There, in the distance, stood an old scarecrow in a wind-torn cloak and with arms outstretched to the sides. It was the arms that created the sail effect, and the cloak resembled a sail so that the scarecrow would spin from side to side in the wind. Vitaliy himself considered it not the best means of scaring crows, but for some reason, many farmers used this very method to protect their fields in the past. Putting his palm to his forehead, he looked into the distance, and at that very moment a ray of sun blinded Vitaliy. Squinting, he continued to look in the direction where something was creating such strong glare that the sunbeam reached the veranda. Vitaliy put aside his half-empty plate and hurried to the attic. There he took the binoculars and, assuming a comfortable position, began to peer into the distance, where something was indeed glinting every time the sun's rays broke through the clouds. But what struck the young man most was that this object was lying at the base of the pole on which the straw scarecrow stood. Despite the distance, Vitaliy decided that it would take him only about 15 minutes to reach that spot, and since he was having lunch anyway, he could cover this distance without feeling guilty for wasting work time. Going outside, he hurried in the right direction, but when he entered the field, he realized that the road would be more difficult than it seemed at first. The damp earth stuck to his soles so much that after returning, he would have to thoroughly wash his shoes, but he continued on. And when there were only a few dozen meters left to the glinting object, Vitaliy could no longer take his eyes off the scarecrow. The last time people lived in the Karpov house was at least 10 years ago, and during this time, with proper care of the adjacent fields, they were not sown at all. This meant that there was absolutely no one to take care of the scarecrow, but it looked as if it had been installed here only a few weeks ago. Tearing his gaze away from it, Vitaliy looked down, and a chill immediately ran through him. A pink plush teddy bear lay a meter from the pole, looking up with its beady eyes, and around its neck was a homemade scarf with foil inserts, which was what created the glare in the sun. Picking up the soiled but practically new toy from the ground, Vitaliy looked around in all directions, searching for the teddy bear's owner with his eyes. He could not remember if he had seen anything at all near the scarecrow yesterday when he looked through the binoculars. Although, most likely, the pink toy would have immediately caught his eye, since the optics quite allowed him to see it at such a distance. Clutching the teddy bear in his hands, Vitaliy ran toward the house, trying to remember where he had left his cell phone. Yesterday's conversation with the precinct officer came to his mind, and now it was necessary to urgently report his find. Perhaps his call would even help in the search. Running to the house and paying no attention to his dirty shoes, Vitaliy ran into the front hall, looking for his cell phone, and then hurried upstairs, where he had spent the night, and to his relief found the phone on the bed. The precinct officer's number was saved under the name of Mykola Volodymyrovich, and pressing the call button, the young man waited for the beeps, but instead heard a woman's voice. "You do not have enough funds in your account." Vitaliy looked at the display in despair. One had to be a real fool to go to a deserted place for 3 days without replenishing the phone account. He sat down on the edge of the bed, looking at the teddy bear, feeling so empty and depressed that the desire to continue working disappeared completely. Daylight was to end in 5 hours, and instead of collecting boxes, Vitaliy went up to the attic and looked through the binoculars until dark, scanning the fields in the hope of seeing Irina. But again and again his gaze stumbled upon the scarecrow, which gradually began to merge with the impending darkness. Day 3. Waking up at 6 in the morning, Vitaliy felt more than broken. In fact, he never managed to get a good night's sleep. Nightmares tormented him all night, and he woke up at the slightest breath of wind. Several times he went to the window and peered into the darkness, restraining himself from taking a flashlight and walking down the street. Such searches could hardly yield results, but with the onset of a new day, the young man really regretted not doing so. All morning he thought about the missing girl and the teddy bear lying on the bed in the bedroom where things had to be packed now. In the first 2 days, Vitaliy had really done a lot of work and could well meet the 3 o'clock deadline, and then he would have time until morning, which he wanted to spend usefully. Forgetting about breakfast and lunch, he packed things, paying no attention to neatness. Bed linen and things from the chest in the attic were packaged in large bags and lowered into the hall. Books and other little things that remained, wrapped in newspaper and sealed in a box, were already in the front hall at 2:00 in the afternoon. It only remained to fiddle with the things that Vitaliy had found in the basement. In this part of the house it was very damp and cold, but not paying attention to it, he continued to put things in order, glancing at the time. The clock hand had already passed 4. There were still a couple of hours of work left, but he did not lose hope, because it was possible even at night, dressing warmer, to go outside with a flashlight and walk to the very edge of the forest, and there to look for Irina. After all, if the girl was in the field that night, then most likely she could have headed towards the forest. Vitaliy hoped that his assumption would prove to be correct. He swept all the garbage into a heap and, collecting it in a scoop, headed to the stokehold, where a large boiler stood, designed to heat the building. It was practically an iron monster that, when heated, made moaning and buzzing sounds. The young man had seen this device in operation more than once, and every time, being near a working boiler, he felt uneasy. But on the other hand, its insides contained such a huge amount of firewood and coal that the garbage collected in the basement could well fit into it. This would only save time, and, delighted with this idea, Vitaliy carried a bucket of garbage to the boiler. The iron shutter opened with amazing ease, and he had already taken the bucket to splash its contents inside, but noticed that the firebox was not as empty as he thought. There was something inside. Putting the garbage aside, Vitaliy flicked his lighter, illuminating the boiler's insides in the semi-darkness. The flame instantly lit up a pile of ashes, charred doll arms sticking up, as if a half-burnt toy was trying to rise from the dead. Vitaliy cried out in surprise and recoiled to the side. His heart pounded furiously, and the question popped into his head: who needed to burn toys? Perhaps it was done by the last owners of the house, although it was not entirely clear for what purpose. Lighting it a second time and pulling himself together, he stuck his hand inside and pulled out a half-charred doll. But that wasn't all. Inside the doll itself lay another plush toy, seemingly a hare, but it was so badly disfigured by fire that it could be mistaken. Following the hare, Vitaliy pulled out half a dozen more toys, which he placed on the floor. Looking them over, he felt like a man who had found something more than just unnecessary things. For some reason, Vitaliy got the impression that it was nothing but destroyed evidence, just like the pink teddy bear he had found in the field. This thought literally made his blood run cold in his veins. He went upstairs without dumping the garbage into the firebox. The young man could no longer stay in this house. It was necessary to urgently return to the city and find the precinct officer, give him the teddy bear so that Irina's parents could determine if this toy belonged to their daughter, and then the police would simply be obliged to see his find in the stokehold. It was all so clearly formed in his head that the young man did not even begin to ponder his decision. He quickly packed up and, grabbing a flashlight and his phone, left the house in the gathering dusk. The wind outside was beginning to pick up, carrying rain clouds. But before setting off, Vitaliy hurried to the barn to lock it before leaving. Still, it was not worth trying the patience of the realtor, who could deprive Vitaliy of payment for abandoning his workplace as it was. But now money was the least of the young man's concerns. He realized that, most likely, he would reach the city by 11:00, and that was at best. Having locked the lock and lighting his way with the flashlight, he pondered how to shorten the path. It was possible to go through the fields and save at least an hour, although he would have to make his way through the terrible mud. This idea seemed quite acceptable to Vitaliy, and after a couple of kilometers he turned into the fields, where, stepping over earth and lumps, he continued walking, clutching the teddy bear in his left hand. The wind blew cold air in sharp gusts, and at these moments it was necessary to tuck the head into the shoulders so as not to catch a cold in the neck. And at the moment when another wind blow fell on the young man's back, Vitaliy heard something. He froze in place and even turned off the flashlight, waiting for the wind to subside. Pitch darkness enveloped everything around, turning the world into a solid black spot, in which the subsiding wind brought with it someone's voice. Vitaliy looked around, straining his ears in the right direction, and shouted, "Hey, who's there?" But the wind swallowed his words, carried them in the other direction. Then Vitaliy decided that he simply had to check. He turned the flashlight on again and headed in almost the opposite direction, still listening to the howling of the wind. After about 15 minutes, he realized that he had to stop and continue on his way toward the city again. Perhaps it was a wild animal that, being in the forest, made sounds, and the wind carried them all over the area. But for some reason it seemed to the young man that it was still a human voice, and Vitaliy continued to walk deeper and deeper into the fields. And at some point this sound was repeated again. "I hear you. Hey, I am here," he shouted and ran straight, lighting his way. Perhaps the one who was shouting, Vitaliy hoped it was Irina, saw the light of the flashlight, and if so, the child must undoubtedly be moving towards him. "Hey, Irina," he stopped again, breathing heavily and already barely orienting himself as to where exactly he was and how long he had been running through the fields. Vitaliy listened. The voice reached him again, but closer now. Cursing to himself, he ran forward again, repeating the girl's name over and over. He ran forward, shouting the girl's name over and over, and when, after another half-hour of running, his legs, out of fatigue, could not jump over another earthen block, Vitaliy fell face down in the field, miraculously not breaking the flashlight. His face plunged into the ground for a second, softening the blow. Spitting and holding his nose with his hand, Vitaliy got up on his knees, pulled the teddy bear to him, and raised the flashlight. The blow was really hard, and if the ground had been harder, serious injuries would have been unavoidable. But as soon as the young man came to his senses, he heard this sound again. A voice, or rather fragments, as if someone was crying, and the one to whom this undoubtedly childish cry belonged was very close. Vitaliy took the flashlight and illuminated the ground in front of him, but the light snatched someone's feet out of the darkness, shod in old women's boots of a huge size. Someone was standing 2 meters away from him. The flashlight slid higher up the old, hole-ridden pants, and Vitaliy, still kneeling, raised his head. There he saw a cloak, above the collar of which rose a head made of burlap and covered with a hat with unnaturally wide brims, which looked down at Vitaliy with eyes drawn in charcoal. Gusts of wind swayed the scarecrow, and it creaked in the wind, but its arms were no longer spread to the sides as before. It tilted its head to the side and extended its hand. Vitaliy's palm touched its forehead with the fingertips of the glove. "I don't want her to take me." A child's voice came from somewhere to the side, and Vitaliy realized it was Irina. She was somewhere here, very close, in this field along with this terrible scarecrow. "I don't want these dreams," the child's tearful voice continued, and the scarecrow looked into the darkness to where it was coming from. At that moment, Vitaliy grabbed the scarecrow's hand and croaked, trembling all over, but not from the cold, but from the horror that filled him. "No, not her, not her." The scarecrow turned its gaze to the young man and, leaning slightly forward, enveloped his face with both hands, lowering itself lower and lower. Vitaliy, unable to restrain the fear that was rolling over him, released the flashlight and, closing his eyes, clenched his teeth to stifle a scream. Day 4. Konstantin Dyuzhev was beside himself when he discovered that the worker he had left at the Karpov house had disappeared, but found a 5-year-old child in one of the bedrooms, sitting on an empty bed, clutching a teddy bear, and called the police. The precinct officer arrived in 40 minutes with a whole army of police and volunteers who were searching for the child. Everyone rejoiced when Irina was led out of the house, and only Mykola Volodymyrovich walked around the whole house in search of Vitaliy, and when he did not find him, he returned to his car. "He's not there?" asked his assistant, 40-year-old Denis Serhiev, lighting a cigarette and looking towards the field. As if he fell through the ground, Mykola Volodymyrovich replied, opening the driver's door. "Throw away the cigarette and get in the car, we need to go. There are still a lot of papers to fill out." Dennis continued to smoke unhurriedly, hiding from the gusts of cold wind, and still looking towards the fields. "I didn't think it was still standing there," he said. Mikola, looking out of the car, asked, "What are you talking about?" "The Scarecrow. It was installed 15 years ago by Karpov Victor himself, the owner of the house," Dennis added, flicking the cigarette butt to the side. "It seems to me that it was from that autumn that all his troubles began, which forced him to leave our area." "You, back with your fairy tales again," the precinct officer replied with annoyance, starting the engine. He found Vitaly's number on the phone and, pressing the call button, began to listen to the beeps. The phone rang a kilometer away from the car, but even if the men had been in the very center of the field, they would hardly have been able to hear the melody. The muffled music came from underground, just above the spot where the Scarecrow swayed in the wind, examining with its charcoal-drawn eyes the commotion that reigned near the Karpov house. So, Vitaliy disappeared without a trace in mysterious and eerie circumstances, never having time to hand over to the police the material evidence he found in the case of little Irina's disappearance. The girl was found alive and unharmed, but the mystery of what happened to her in those few days, and what role the creepy Scarecrow in the field played in this, remained unsolved. Perhaps Vitaliy knew the answers to these questions, but he took them with him into the darkness of that fateful night. After these events, the Karpov house finally gained a reputation as a cursed place, and there were no more people willing to buy it. People in the district began to be wary of even just walking past this field, especially at night. There were rumors that sometimes a quiet cry and a plea for help could be heard from there, but there were no brave ones to check it out. The silent Scarecrow continued to stand there, impassively gazing at the empty fields around, as if guarding some gloomy secret. The true nature of the events that led to Vitaly's disappearance and Irina's temporary disappearance remained a mystery, shrouded in a fog of fear and mysticism. Perhaps something otherworldly had indeed lurked among those fields, using the old Scarecrow as its puppet. Or perhaps the answer was more earthly, but no less eerie. All these questions remained unanswered, and eventually the case had to be closed. But the memory of those events still troubled the minds of local residents for a long time, turning the surroundings of the Karpov house into a legend, shrouded in gloomy secrets. Well, friends, that concludes our horror portion today. But remember, the darkness is always around, and it is waiting for its time to remind you again. If you enjoyed tickling your nerves and dive into the world of mystery and mysticism, do not forget to put a like, comment and, of course, subscribe to the channel. After all, ahead of you awaits more chilling stories that make your blood run cold in your veins. Click on the bell to not miss new videos, and remember, sometimes the worst is what is hidden in silence. See you in the next installment. Unless, of course, you're afraid.